It was a quiet evening by the Bosphorus Strait, the water shimmering beneath the setting sun, casting long shadows over the old city of Istanbul. The golden hue of the fading daylight danced on the surface of the water, making it appear almost magical. It was the kind of scene that visitors marveled at, perfectly picturesque, serene, and beautiful. But for those who had lived by the Bosphorus for generations, the strait's charm hid a much darker secret. The locals knew well that there was more to the Bosphorus than just its beauty. If you listened closely enough, if you stood in the right spot by the shore when the city fell silent, you might hear something faint, something that sent shivers down your spine, whispers coming from the water, whispers that no living being could produce. For centuries, stories had circulated about those whispers, and the people of Istanbul spoke of them in hushed tones, especially at night. No one really knew where the whispers came from, but they seemed to emanate from the Bosphorus itself. The sound was soft, almost gentle, but there was something eerie and unsettling about it. It was as if the strait had a voice that spoke secrets of the past, secrets no one should ever know.
The legend of the Bosphorus was older than anyone could remember. It wasn't just a tale told to scare children. It was an ancient story, one passed down from generation to generation, from the old fishermen to the young travelers. It was said that hundreds of years ago, a group of sailors set out on an expedition across the strait. They were an experienced crew, brave men who knew the waters of the Bosphorus like the back of their hands. But that night, something went terribly wrong. The waters, once calm and inviting, turned against them. The sailors' ship was torn apart by an unseen force. The next morning, when other ships came looking for them, they found nothing but the wreckage of the ship, its sails shredded as though something had viciously attacked it.
There were no bodies, no sign of the men who had been aboard. It was as though the sea had swallowed them whole, leaving no trace behind. What was even more terrifying, however, were the strange whispers that seemed to hang in the air, carried by the winds from the water. Some said it was the voices of the sailors, their souls trapped by the curse of the Bosphorus, condemned to wander the strait for eternity. Others, more cynical, believed it was simply the wind or the creaking of the ship's remains. But no matter what they told themselves, the locals couldn't shake the feeling that something darker lurked beneath the surface. The whispers became more frequent as the years passed, always there, but never quite clear enough to understand. It wasn't just an occasional sound. It was a constant presence, a reminder of something that should have been forgotten, but never was. Those who dared to go out to the strait at night, even the bravest sailors, would often hear it. Sometimes the whispers would come in short bursts, as if someone was speaking just out of earshot. Other times they would grow louder, as though something was trying to communicate. The voices were never in a language anyone could understand, but they carried a sense of dread, a sense of something ancient and malevolent, something that had been waiting for centuries. Some believed that it was the spirits of the sailors, forever cursed to roam the Bosphorus. They thought that the souls of those lost men had become part of the water itself, bound to it by the powerful force that had taken them. The sailors had been warned. Many had heard the strange stories of the Bosphorus, and they had been told to stay away from certain parts of the strait. But their greed for discovery, their hunger for glory, had led them to ignore the warnings. They paid the price for their arrogance, disappearing without a trace, their spirits doomed to wander the strait for eternity. But others believed the truth was far darker than a simple curse. They said the Bosphorus wasn't just a body of water, but a portal to something ancient, something that predated even the legends of the city. Some whispered that deep beneath the surface of the water, there was an ancient entity, something older than time itself. This entity had been disturbed by the sailors, and it was this force that had taken them, punishing them for trespassing in its domain. It wasn't just the souls of the sailors that lingered, but something much more sinister, something that fed on the fear of anyone who dared come too close to the strait at night. Over time, the whispers became more than just a story. They became a part of the city's folklore, a warning that every local knew. No one dared to approach the Bosphorus after dark without feeling a sense of unease and unexplainable tension that filled the air. The strait, once a vital route for trade and transport, became a place to avoid, a place that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Those who lived by the strait spoke of the whispers as if they were a part of the environment itself. It was a fact of life for the people of Istanbul, a reminder of the mystery that lay beneath the waves. The whispers became a part of their history, a part of their everyday lives. People would tell stories about them over cups of tea, or while sitting on the balconies, gazing out at the water. They would speak of the sailors, their disappearance, and the strange, eerie sounds that filled the night air. But no one ever really dared to go deeper, to ask the questions that would unlock the full truth of what had happened. And so, the whispers continued haunting the Bosphorus, a reminder of something dark that had been hidden for centuries. It was a secret that no one could fully understand, but it was a secret that was never truly forgotten. The Bosphorus had its own story to tell, and if you listened carefully enough, if you allowed the eerie whispers to reach your ears, you might just hear the truth. The truth was out there, waiting. But perhaps it was a truth better left untold. For some stories are too dangerous to hear, and some legends are too terrifying to uncover. The Bosphorus was a place of mystery, a place where the past and present merged, where the whispers of the lost could still be heard, carried on the wind. The sailors who had disappeared had left behind a legacy of fear, a legacy that would never be forgotten, no matter how much time passed. Mira had always heard the stories, the whispered tales of the Bosphorus and the eerie happenings that surrounded it. Growing up in Istanbul, she'd heard them at dinner tables, during family gatherings, and on late-night walks along the shores of the strait. The locals spoke of the ancient curse, the ghostly whispers, and the vanishing sailors as if it were a fact of life, something embedded in the very fabric of their existence. But Mira, being a young journalist, was far more skeptical. She had always dismissed it as folklore, the kind of story meant to entertain tourists or scare children before bed. To her, it was just another tale, like any other legend that cities and towns often tell to keep their histories alive. That night, everything changed. It was an unusually quiet evening, and Mira had been working late, finishing an article for the newspaper. As part of her routine, she decided to take a walk along the Bosphorus to clear her mind. The gentle evening breeze felt refreshing, and the smell of salt water lingered in the cool air. She had walked this same path many times before, her thoughts often drifting as she gazed out at the water. The city was a mix of sounds, distant chatter from street vendors, the hum of cars passing by, and the occasional honk of a taxi. It was the familiar symphony of Istanbul, a rhythm Mira had grown up with. But tonight, there was something different about the air. She walked along the shore, her shoes crunching against the pebbles, as she stared out across the dark waters. The surface shimmered under the moonlight, calm and inviting, as if it were hiding something beneath. The air had a cool edge to it, and Mira pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. She paused by an old pier, the wood creaking beneath her feet, and looked out at the water. The moon reflected on the surface, but for some reason, tonight, it felt more ominous, like there was something lurking in the deep shadows of the strait. And, without warning, something caught her eye. At first, it was just a movement in the water, something small and fleeting. She squinted, trying to make sense of it, but the shadows seemed to dance in strange ways, distorting what she saw. Her heart quickened, and she took a step closer to the edge, hoping to catch a better glimpse of whatever had disturbed the water. The night was still, too still, as if the city itself was holding its breath. She leaned in a little more, her gaze fixed on the dark water. When she saw it again, a shadow, unmistakable and clear this time, moving slowly just beneath the surface. Mira's first instinct was to brush it off. It was probably a fish, she told herself, or maybe a floating piece of debris. The Bosphorus was full of mysteries, after all. But it was also full of the everyday, the fish, the boats, the garbage that collected at the water's edge. But as she took another step closer, the whispering began. It was faint at first, barely audible. The sound was soft, like a distant murmur carried by the wind, but it was unmistakable. Mira paused, her breath catching in her throat. The whispers were there, rising from the water, just beyond her reach. At first, she thought it was nothing more than the wind, or the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. But then, the whispers grew louder, sharper. They seemed to move with the breeze, following her, weaving through the space around her. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the creeping unease in her chest. It's nothing, she thought, just the wind or the sound of the city in the distance. But then, as if to prove her wrong, the whispers grew even louder, and one word cut through the night, clear as day: Mira. Frozen in place, Mira's heart raced. The voice that spoke her name was like nothing she had ever heard before. Low, raspy, and yet undeniably clear. It was calling to her, pulling her in. But from where? She turned around quickly, her eyes scanning the area around her. The pier was empty. There was no one there, no shadowy figure, no sign of movement. She was alone, but the voice had come from the water, from the very depths of the Bosphorus. Her skin prickled with goosebumps, and her breath became shallow. She had always dismissed the stories, the whispers of the past, but now they felt real, as if they were alive, circling around her like an invisible presence. She backed away slowly, her feet hesitant, her mind racing. It was just a trick of the mind, she told herself. Just a coincidence. Maybe the wind carried a sound, and I imagined the rest. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. The whispers were growing louder now, almost as if they were following her. She turned and began to walk faster, her steps quickening as she tried to escape the eerie presence that seemed to hang in the air. The voice was still there, echoing in her mind, like a shadow trailing just behind her. Mira, it called again, this time more urgent, more desperate. The sound seemed to come from the water, from every direction, until it was all she could hear. The world around her seemed to vanish, leaving only the whispers and the ever-deepening fear that gripped her heart. She stopped suddenly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. There was no escaping it, no hiding from the voice that called her name. It was in the air, in the water, all around her. She looked out over the Bosphorus once more, and for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of the legends, the curse of the sailors who had vanished without a trace, the whispers of the past that still lingered in the strait. Mira. The voice was clearer now, almost as if it were right beside her, whispering in her ear. Mira turned sharply, her body tense and ready to run. But there was no one there, just the silent night and the soft lap of the waves against the shore. Her heart was racing, and her body was trembling. She looked down at the water, her mind telling her to leave, but her feet refused to move. It's just a trick, she thought, her breath shallow. It's not real. But in that moment, she knew deep down that something was terribly wrong. The whispers weren't just a ghostly echo of the past. They were something more, something that had been waiting for her. She could feel it now, its presence, its power. She wasn't just hearing the stories anymore. She was part of them, and they were part of her. Mira took a step back, the words of the old man from earlier. The whispers are not for you to hear, echoing in her mind. She had been warned. But how could she have known? How could she have known that tonight, on this quiet evening, she would become part of the Bosphorus's darkest secret? The whispers were still there, still following her, still calling her name. But now, she couldn't turn back. Mira couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to her after hearing the whispers. Her mind raced, replaying the eerie voice calling her name, the strange shadow in the water. It was no longer just a fleeting moment. It had become an obsession, an unshakable weight that pressed against her chest. She couldn't ignore it. There was something deeply unsettling about the whole experience, something that reached beyond her skepticism and began to stir something ancient within her. The whispers weren't just stories. Something was happening, and she needed answers. She decided to visit someone she had heard about many times during her time in Istanbul. A man who lived in a small, weather-beaten house by the Bosphorus. His name was Hassan, an old man with a reputation for knowing the city's oldest stories, the ones that were buried deep in the forgotten corners of history. People often called him the keeper of ancient stories, and though his house was small, it was filled with relics of old Istanbul, dusty books, worn-out maps, and artifacts that seemed to hold the weight of the city's past. Some said he was the last of the old storytellers, the ones who kept the truth hidden from the world. Mira had heard rumors about him over the years. People spoke of his knowledge of the supernatural, of his deep understanding of the dark legends that still haunted Istanbul. She wasn't sure whether to trust him, but after the night by the Bosphorus, she felt desperate. She had to know more. She had to understand what was happening to her, what was behind those whispers. So, despite the skepticism that still lingered in her mind, Mira set off toward his home, her heart heavy with the uncertainty of what she might learn. As she walked the narrow streets of the old quarter, the familiar sounds of Istanbul faded away. The bustling noise of the city seemed distant, muffled by the shadows that gathered around her. The closer she got to the house, the more the air seemed to change. The wind shifted and a chill ran down her spine. There was something about Hassan's house, something that made the air around it feel heavier, as if it had absorbed years of untold secrets. The small house stood at the edge of the Bosphorus, its stone walls worn and weathered, a testament to the years it had stood in place. The window panes were cracked, and the door hung slightly ajar, as though waiting for someone to enter. Mira knocked gently on the door. It creaked open with a sound that seemed too loud for the quiet street. Inside, the dim light from a single lamp flickered, casting long shadows across the room. The air smelled of old books, incense, and something faintly metallic, like rust. The man himself was sitting by a small fireplace, his back hunched with age, his face covered in deep wrinkles that told the story of a life lived in the shadows of time. He looked up as she entered, and his eyes sharp despite his frailty. Mira could see the recognition in his gaze, though she hadn't introduced herself. He had heard of her, no doubt. Her reputation as a journalist had reached even the most remote corners of Istanbul. "Ah, Mira," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I've been expecting you." Mira felt a shiver run through her. "You've been expecting me?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," he replied, his voice laced with an eerie calm. "The whispers have started again, haven't they?"
Mira nodded, her throat dry. "I've heard them. The voices.
They called my name." Hassan's eyes darkened at the mention of the whispers. His hands, which had been resting on the arm of his chair, clenched tightly, and his face grew pale. The warmth of the fire seemed to flicker out for a moment, leaving the room colder than before. "The whispers are not for you to hear," he said quietly, his voice trembling slightly.
"They are the voices of those who tried to uncover the truth." Mira's heart skipped a beat.
"What truth?" she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face, as if measuring whether she was ready to hear what he had to say. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and solemn. "There are things in this world, Mira, that should never be uncovered. There are forces, ancient and powerful, that dwell beneath the surface of the Bosphorus. And there are those who, driven by curiosity or greed, sought to discover them. But they paid the price." Hassan paused, his face shadowed by memories too painful to share. Many years ago, a group of scholars and sailors attempted to find the source of the whispers. They thought they could understand the power that lay in the waters. They believed that the strait was just a river, like any other, that the stories were just tales. But when they went too deep, when they uncovered what was hidden, they were driven mad. They couldn't handle what they found. What they learned was too much for their minds, and so they were consumed by it. Mira felt her stomach tighten with unease. She wanted to ask more, to press for details, but the fear in Hassan's eyes held her back. "Who or what is this thing that lies beneath the waters?" she whispered. Hassan's voice dropped to a near whisper as well. "It was once human," he said, his words heavy with an ancient sadness. "But it has been twisted by a curse, an ancient curse that binds it to the Bosphorus. It feeds off fear, off the souls of those who dare to seek its truth. It's not just a ghost, Mira. It's something much worse. It has power, powers that no one should ever try to understand." Mira was silent for a long time, the weight of his words sinking in. She had heard stories before, of course. Legends of haunted waters, of spirits trapped in the deep. But something about Hassan's words felt different. There was a rawness to them, a truth that cut through the layers of skepticism she had built over the years. He wasn't telling a story. He was warning her. "But what can it do?" Mira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hassan leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "It can reach into your mind," he said. "It can make you see things that aren't there, make you hear things that aren't real. It can twist your thoughts, your memories, until you can no longer tell what is true. And once it has you, it will never let go. You will hear the whispers forever. They will drive you mad, just like those who came before you." Mira sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had always thought of herself as strong, as someone who could see through the supernatural. someone who could separate fact from fiction. But Hassan's warning, his fearful tone, shook her to her core. "I thought the Bosphorus was just a part of the city's history," she said, trying to steady her nerves. "I didn't think it was alive." "It is," Hassan replied quietly. "The Bosphorus is ancient, older than any of us, and it remembers. The whispers are a reminder of the past, of those who are lost, and of the power that lies beneath the water. You've heard it, Mira, and now it's calling you." The room seemed to grow darker as the weight of his words settled over her. Mira felt a chill crawl up her spine, as if the very walls of the house were closing in on her. She had come here looking for answers, but now, the more she learned, the less certain she was of what was real. Hassan stood up slowly, his frail body moving with a deliberate slowness. "I've told you the truth, Mira. What you do with it is up to you. But remember this, some truths are not meant to be known." Mira nodded, her head spinning with everything she had learned. She stood up, ready to leave, but as she turned toward the door, Hassan's voice stopped her. "Do not return to the Bosphorus, Mira," he warned. "It is too late for you. The whispers will not stop now. They will find you, no matter where you go." Mira didn't look back as she stepped out into the cold night air. The chill of the warning still gripped her, but she knew she couldn't walk away. Not yet. She had heard the whispers. She had felt the pull of the Bosphorus. And now, no matter how dangerous the truth might be, she had to uncover it. Mira's obsession with the mystery of the Bosphorus grew each day, the pull of the unknown consuming her. Every night, she sat at her desk, poring over old documents, books and records, trying to uncover the truth behind the whispers that had haunted her since that night by the water. The more she researched, the more the pieces began to fall into place. But the answers she was uncovering were far darker and more troubling than she could have ever imagined. She discovered that the group of sailors who had vanished had been part of a forbidden expedition, one that had taken them to the heart of the Bosphorus, far beyond the areas where most ships dared to travel. They were not just any sailors. They had been scholars, explorers, and men of ambition, eager to uncover secrets buried deep beneath the waves. They had heard the stories, the old legends whispered by the locals of ancient relics hidden in the depths of the strait. But what they found was far more terrifying than any of them had imagined. The expedition had been shrouded in secrecy. There were no official records, no formal approval. The sailors had set out on their journey under the cover of darkness, determined to find whatever it was that had been hidden beneath the water for centuries. They were driven by a mixture of curiosity and greed, eager to discover something that would make them famous, something that would change history. But as Mira dug deeper, she found conflicting accounts about what exactly they had uncovered. Some said it was an ancient relic, a treasure of unimaginable value, hidden beneath the water's surface. Others spoke of something far darker, an entity, a being of unimaginable power that had been lying dormant for centuries. Whatever it was, the sailors had uncovered it, and they had awakened something that had never been meant to be disturbed. The expedition had ended in disaster. The ship, a sturdy vessel that had sailed the Bosphorus countless times, was found the next morning, abandoned. Its sails were torn to shreds, as if something powerful had torn through them with unnatural force. There were no bodies, no sign of the men who had been aboard, only the wreckage and the whispers that lingered in the air, growing louder with each passing day. It was as if the very waters of the Bosphorus had claimed them, swallowed them whole, and left nothing behind but their terror. The whispers had begun shortly after the expedition. They grew louder and more frequent as the years went on, until they became an inseparable part of the Bosphorus, a haunting reminder of the sailors who had disappeared. The locals spoke of the expedition in hushed tones, as if speaking too much about it would invite the wrath of whatever had claimed the sailors. But the whispers never stopped. They were always there, drifting on the wind, always just beyond reach. Mira felt a chill run down her spine as she read through the accounts of those who had lived through the aftermath of the sailors' disappearance. The whispers, they said, were not just a coincidence. They were not the result of some natural phenomenon. No, they were the voices of the sailors, their souls trapped in the depths of the Bosphorus, doomed to wander the waters for all eternity. But what was worse was what the sailors had uncovered before their disappearance. What had they found that could have cursed them so? And more importantly, why had it started calling to her? As Mira delved deeper into the mystery, strange things began to happen. It started subtly at first, a feeling of unease that clung to her like a second skin. She would sit at her desk, surrounded by books and papers, when suddenly she would feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. A cold breeze would sweep through the room, and she would look up, expecting to see the window open, only to find it tightly shut. But the feeling would linger, the coldness would remain, and the silence would grow thick and suffocating. One night, while working late into the early hours, Mira stood up to stretch her legs. As she walked across the room, she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. A book, one she had left on her desk earlier, was lying open on the floor. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew she hadn't knocked it off the desk. She had been sitting right there, engrossed in her research. But there it was, the book lying open on the floor, as if someone had placed it there. Mira bent down to pick it up, but as her fingers touched the cover, the room seemed to grow colder. Her breath misted in front of her face, and the whispers filled the air once more. Not for you to hear. The words echoed in her mind, the same words the old man had spoken to her. She froze, the book still in her hands, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around the room, but there was no one there. The whispers had become louder, more insistent. They were no longer just a distant sound. They were all around her, coming from every direction. Her pulse quickened as the voices seemed to draw closer. They weren't just whispers now. They were words, harsh and fragmented, like a broken record that was repeating itself over and over. As the night wore on, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The whispers hadn't stopped. They were there, in the background, a constant presence in her mind. And then, just when she thought she might go mad from the eerie sounds, her phone buzzed. She glanced down, half expecting it to be a message. But the screen was empty. No notifications, no messages, just the blank, glowing screen. She frowned and set the phone down, trying to push the unease away. But the buzzing had set her nerves on edge. It was as if someone was trying to reach her, to contact her in some way, but there was no one there. Mira tried to sleep, but the whispers wouldn't let her. They followed her, crawling into her thoughts, twisting and turning, becoming a constant hum in the background of her mind. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. The strange occurrences, the feelings of being watched, the whispers, everything was connected. It had all started with the sailors, with the forbidden expedition that had uncovered something deep beneath the waters of the Bosphorus. But what was it? What had they discovered that could curse them so? And why was it calling to her? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise, a soft, scraping sound coming from the direction of the window. Mira's heart stopped, and she sat up quickly, her eyes darting around the room. The window was shut tight, but the noise persisted. It was as if something was moving outside, scratching against the glass. Mira's breath quickened as she slowly stood up, her legs trembling. She moved toward the window, her hand trembling as she reached for the curtain. She pulled it aside, but there was nothing there, just the empty street below, bathed in the dim light of the street lamps. But the whispers were still there, swirling in the air around her, glowing louder. Mira closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise, trying to make sense of what was happening. The whispers, the strange occurrences, the feeling of being watched. It was all connected. And now she realized she was no longer just researching the Bosphorus mystery. She was a part of it. The whispers weren't just a warning. They were a call to uncover the truth. But at what cost? Mira's obsession with the Bosphorus grew to an unbearable intensity. Every waking moment, the whispers followed her, lingering in the background of her mind, like a haunting melody she couldn't escape. No matter what she did, no matter how much she tried to push it away, the pull of the strait, of the mystery that lay beneath its surface, was always there. She felt like she was losing control, like something deep inside of her was changing. The more she learned, the more it seemed that there was no turning back. The whispers had found her, and now they weren't just part of her thoughts, they were part of her reality. One night, unable to sleep, Mira stood by her window, gazing out at the Bosphorus.
The city was silent, save for the occasional distant honk of a car or the faint murmur of voices in the streets below. But Mira couldn't rest. The unease had settled into her bones, a constant weight that made it impossible to ignore. Something in her knew that she needed to go back to the water, to the place where it all began, to face whatever it was that had taken hold of her. She couldn't explain it, but a part of her felt that the answers lay there, just beyond her reach.
The night was colder than usual as she made her way back to the Bosphorus. The moon hung high in the sky, its pale light casting an eerie glow on the water. Mira wrapped her coat tighter around herself, but the chill in the air seemed to seep into her bones, relentless and unyielding. As she walked along the shore, the familiar sights of Istanbul seemed distant, as if she were in a different world altogether. The sounds of the city, the bustling markets, the laughter of passers-by, faded into nothingness. All she could hear now were the whispers. They were there, faint at first, like a distant echo. But with each step she took closer to the water, they grew louder, clearer. Mira. The voice whispered her name, the tone so soft, yet filled with an unsettling urgency. Mira's heart began to race. She tried to dismiss it, to tell herself it was just her imagination. But deep down, she knew better. The whispers were real, and they were calling to her. Her steps quickened as she neared the edge of the water, her eyes scanning the dark expanse of the Bosphorus. The strait seemed to stretch out endlessly before her, its surface smooth like glass, undisturbed by the passing of time. But something about it felt different tonight. The air was thick, with an oppressive weight, as though the very earth beneath her feet was holding its breath. As she stood there, staring out at the water, a cold chill seemed to wrap around her, tightening with each passing second. Mira shivered. Suddenly, the water began to move. At first, it was a slight ripple, barely noticeable against the stillness of the night. But then it grew. The ripples turned into waves, crashing against the shore with increasing force, as if something beneath the surface was stirring, waking up. Mira took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. The coldness around her deepened, and the whispers grew more frantic, more desperate. She could hear them now, not just in her mind, but all around her, swirling in the air like an invisible storm. Mira, come closer. Come and see. Her breath caught in her throat as the water seemed to reach out toward her. It was as if the very waves were alive, pulling at her, drawing her in. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, shifting with the movement of the water. Mira stumbled, her feet slipping on the wet rocks as the whispers became deafening, surrounding her from every direction. The voice that had once been soft and distant was now sharp, insistent, as though it were coming from within her own mind. Mira, the voice whispered again, this time louder, clearer, almost as if it were right beside her. Come, join us. Panic surged through her as she tried to regain her balance, but it was no use. The water had a hold on her, pulling at her feet as if something from beneath was reaching up to drag her down. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her breath came in short, frantic gasps. The whispers were no longer just whispers. They were a chorus, a cacophony of voices that seemed to echo from every corner of the world, each one calling her name, urging her to step closer to the wire. Her legs felt weak, and her mind raced with terror. She knew she had to move, to get away from the water, but her feet felt frozen in place. She could hear the sloshing of the waves as they came closer, as though they were beckoning her, coaxing her into the depths. Mira's eyes darted around, looking for anything to hold on to, but there was nothing. The shore was empty, and the darkness pressed in on all sides. And then, through the thick mist that had begun to form along the water's edge, she saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a dark shape rising slowly from the depths of the Bosphorus. Mira's heart stopped, and her breath caught in her throat. The figure moved, rising out of the water like a nightmare come to life. It was not fully human, not in the way she understood it. Its form was twisted, its body pale and rotting, as if it had been pulled from the depths of some forgotten grave. The whispers grew louder, drowning out everything else, filling her mind with a maddening sense of urgency. The figure stretched its hand out toward her, its fingers long and bony, reaching for her as if it were beckoning her to come closer. The water seemed to surge around it, pulling it upward, the figure rising further and further from the depths. Mira. The voice was almost a hiss now, the sound of something ancient, something twisted, rising from the very bowels of the earth. Come to me. Mira could feel the power of its presence, a dark energy that gripped her chest and tightened around her throat. It was as though the Bosphorus itself had come alive, its ancient force reaching out to claim her. She could hear the other whispers, the voices of the sailors who had vanished, their souls lost to the depths. And now it was her turn. She was the next one to be claimed. But just as the figure reached out for her, a burst of cold air swept through the shore, snapping her out of her trance. Mira staggered backward, her heart pounding in her chest as the figure slowly sank back into the water, disappearing into the depths. The whispers still lingered, but now they were fading, growing distant, as if the figure had taken them with it. Mira's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the wet ground, gasping for air. The world around her spun, her mind reeling from what she had just witnessed. She had seen it, felt it, the darkness that lay beneath the Bosphorus, the entity that had been awakened by the sailors and was now reaching for her. The whispers had been real, and they were calling her. She was no longer just a witness to the legend. She had become part of it, and there was no going back. Mira ran as fast as she could, her legs pushing her through the narrow, dimly lit streets of Istanbul. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and her heart pounded against her chest, as if it too had become a prisoner to the fear that consumed her. She could feel it, the presence behind her, dark and oppressive, as though the very air was thick with something malevolent. It was no longer just a distant whisper. It was real, It was following her, growing closer with every step she took. Her mind raced, When she finally reached her apartment, she slammed the door behind her, bolting it shut. She leaned against the door, trying to steady her breathing, but the weight of her fear was suffocating. She had escaped, or so she thought. But deep down, she knew she hadn't. She hadn't run far enough. The whispers hadn't stopped. They followed her, echoing in her ears, even as she stood there, trembling in the darkness of her apartment. She sank down to the floor, her back pressed against the door, her hands covering her ears in a futile attempt to block out the voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. They were louder now, more insistent, filling her mind with a constant, maddening hum. Mira, Mira, come join us. The voice was not the same as before. It was sharper, more demanding, filled with a hunger that Mira could feel deep within her bones. She wasn't just hearing it, she was feeling it. This entity, this curse, it was alive. It was waiting for her to crack, to succumb to its pull. And she could feel herself slipping. Her mind spun as she desperately tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The sailors, their disappearance, the whispers. They had been part of a much larger story, one that had been buried beneath the Bosphorus for centuries. The old man Hassan had warned her about the curse, about the entity that lay hidden in the water. But she hadn't truly understood until now. She hadn't grasped the terrible truth. The whispers had never been warnings. They were a trap, a lure designed to draw her in, to make her part of the curse. She tried to stand, to move, but her body felt weak, as if the very air around her was pressing down, suffocating her. She had to escape, to get away from this place. But the whispers followed her, growing louder and louder. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The presence was suffocating, overwhelming. It was inside her mind, inside her thoughts, twisting everything she believed to be real. "You're next," the voice whispered again. A cold, sinister promise. Mira's vision blurred as her mind descended into chaos. She could feel the walls of her apartment closing in on her, the floor beneath her shifting, warping, as if the very space around her was being consumed by something dark, something ancient. The whispers swirled around her like a whirlwind, filling the air with an unbearable pressure. She could feel herself losing grip on reality. She couldn't escape. It was here. It had followed her home, and there was no place left to run. In the depths of her mind, the truth finally came crashing down on her. The sailors hadn't disappeared by accident. They hadn't just wandered into the wrong part of the Bosphorus. They had uncovered something that no one was ever meant to find. They had awoken the entity, the embodiment of the curse itself, the ancient being that had been lying dormant beneath the water for centuries. It wasn't just a malevolent spirit. It was more than that. It was the curse of the Bosphorus, a force that fed off fear, that thrived on the souls of those who dared to seek its truth. The sailors had found it, and in doing so, They had sealed their fate. Mira's breath quickened as she struggled to process the enormity of what she had just realized. The whispers weren't just random sounds or a haunting reminder of the past. They were the entity's way of calling out, of pulling her in, of marking her as its next victim. She had uncovered the truth, and now she was part of its curse. There was no escape. Her mind was unraveling, spiraling into a darkness that she couldn't fight. The whispers were all around her now, so loud, so constant, she could barely think. "Mira, come to us. You're next." The words echoed in her skull, each one a sharp, jagged blade of terror that cut deeper into her consciousness. The force behind the whispers wasn't just trying to frighten her. It was trying to break her, to drag her down into the depths, into the darkness where the souls of the lost sailors wandered endlessly. She tried to stand again, her legs shaking beneath her, but her body wouldn't obey. The curse had already begun to take hold, slowly eroding her will, her sense of self. The whispers were no longer just sounds. They were her reality, her world, pressing in from all sides. She could feel them tearing at the fabric of her mind, pulling apart the very threads of her thoughts. She wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. And then, just as the darkness seemed to consume her entirely, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. For a brief, fleeting moment, there was nothing. Mira's heart pounded in the stillness, the absence of sound making her feel even more alone, more trapped. But then, a new voice cut through the silence. It wasn't the whispers anymore. It was something deeper, more insidious. "You're next," the voice said, slow and deliberate, as though savoring the words. Mira's blood ran cold. She knew then that the entity was no longer just a presence. It was real. It had awakened, and now it was coming for her. The sailors hadn't just vanished because they had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. They had discovered the truth, and they had paid the price. The whispers, the entity, it had been feeding on them, on their fear, and now it was feeding on her. In the silence that followed, Mira sat there, trembling, paralyzed by the truth. There was no escaping it. The Bosphorus was more than just water, more than just a part of the city's history. It was a force, an ancient power that had been awakened by those who dared to seek its secrets. And now, it was waiting for her. She had sought the truth, and now it was claiming her. The whispers had been a warning, yes, but they were also a trap, and she had walked right into it. As Mira sat there, her mind racing, the voice came again, closer this time. "You're next," it repeated. And with that, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. There was no escape. The curse wasn't just a legend. It was real, and now it had claimed her. And that, dear reader, is the story of the Bosphorus. The whispers, the entity, and the terrible truth hidden beneath the waves. The curse isn't just a legend. It's real, and it's waiting for those who dare to seek its truth. For Mira, there would be no way out. Only the whispers, the darkness, and the endless pull of the Bosphorus.